The ships came down over Chicago on a Tuesday in October, low black wedges sliding beneath a ceiling of gray cloud that had already been threatening rain since morning. By the time the first alert broke into local television broadcasts, three of them had already settled over the loop, casting shadows the size of city blocks across streets still crowded with lunch traffic. Panic moved through downtown in waves, each one slightly worse than the last. Office towers emptied onto sidewalks already jammed with delivery trucks and taxis. Sirens layered over each other until the individual sounds blurred into one continuous wail. A window washer 40 stories up rode his platform down at emergency speed, convinced the ship above him was about to fire on the building. It never did. Not yet. The invaders called themselves the Osrath Combine. They had taken 41 worlds in the last 2 centuries, and their doctrine was simple: identify population centers, disable communication, project overwhelming force, and let fear do the rest of the work before a shot was even fired. Their survey teams had studied Earth's major cities for months, cataloging military installations, government buildings, transit hubs, anything that looked strategically vital. Federal Plaza fell under their initial scan grid. So did O'Hare, the merchandise mart, the entire stretch of the Magnificent Mile. Analysts aboard the command fleet had drawn tidy red circles around every landmark a satellite photograph could flatter, and around every one of those circles they had written some version of the same conclusion: hold this, and the city bends. None of it accounted for Taylor Street. Nothing about Vito Marchetti's deep dish house screamed strategic value on paper. 42 seats, 11 employees, a reservation list that ran 6 weeks out, and a walk-in line that started forming an hour before the doors opened on weekends. It was, by every metric the Combine survey drones had gathered, an unremarkable neighborhood restaurant serving an unremarkable regional dish. That assessment would turn out to be the single greatest miscalculation the Osrath Combine made on the entire planet. 31 years Vito Marchetti had run that kitchen, ever since his father handed him the ladle and the lease in the same conversation, and told him that if he ever let a pie leave that kitchen with soggy crust, he could consider himself disowned. Broad-shouldered from 3 decades of lifting cast-iron pans the size of manhole covers, Vito carried a temper the entire staff had learned to read the way sailors read weather fronts rolling in off the lake. Flour dusted his forearms like a light snow that Tuesday afternoon, and he stood over the ovens arguing with his sous chef Dominic about whether the sausage needed another 5 minutes. "It needs another 5 minutes," Dominic said. "It needs 4. You always say 4. Because it's always 4. Vito checked the pie through the oven glass, straightened, and reached for a towel slung over his shoulder. Then the front windows blew inward. Not shattered, blown, the entire glass facade of the restaurant caving into the dining room in a spray of shards and splintered wood framing, followed a half-second later by a concussive wave of hot air that knocked 3 tables sideways and sent a rack of wine bottles crashing to the floor. Outside, through the ruined windows, a shape the size of a delivery truck hung low over Taylor Street, its underside glowing a sickly blue. Nobody in the restaurant moved, not at first. Screaming came a beat later, and with it, everybody moved at once, servers diving under tables, the hostess dragging 2 customers toward the kitchen doors, glasses shattering against tile, chairs overturning in a chorus of scraping wood. Smoke and dust filled the dining room. Vito stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, towel still in hand, and felt something in his chest go very cold and very still. Someone had put a crater in his floor. 3 armored figures dropped through the broken window frame and landed with a sound like dropped anvils. Matte black plating covered their frames, close to 7 feet tall, narrow elongated helmets fitted with twin lens clusters that glowed faint violet in the smoke. Weapons mounted along their forearms hummed with barely contained charge. A translator crackled to life from the lead soldier's chest. "Inhabitants of this structure, this territory is now under the authority of the Osrath Combine. Remain still and you will not be harmed. Stillness was not on offer. A busboy named Ray bolted for the kitchen and took a warning shot across the shoulder that vaporized a table on its way past him. He kept running anyway, and everyone who survived the day later agreed it had been the correct call. Wreckage filled the lead soldier's field of view, overturned tables, spilled wine, shattered glass, but its helmet turned toward the one detail that would decide everything that followed. The open kitchen pass, where 6 deep-dish pies sat cooling on a rack, each one roughly the diameter of a manhole cover, each one representing 40 minutes of preparation, and one of them, the sausage pie closest to the pass, representing 31 years of a recipe nobody outside that kitchen had ever been trusted with. One careless sweep of the soldier's forearm sent the entire rack crashing off its stand. 6 pies hit the tile in a chorus of shattering ceramic, tomato sauce and cheese and sausage spreading in a wide, ruinous slick across the kitchen floor. Silence took Vito instead of a scream. Something inside him had gone quiet in the particular way that things go quiet right before they break for good. Dominic saw the look cross his chef's face and took an involuntary step backward. "Chef." "They knocked my pies," Vito said, flat, almost conversational. Somehow that was worse than shouting would have been. "They knocked my pies on the floor." "Chef, we should." 4 strides carried Vito across the kitchen before Dominic finished the sentence. He grabbed the 22-inch cast-iron deep-dish pan hanging from the overhead rack. The pan he'd used to sear, bake, and occasionally threaten every cook who'd worked under him in 3 decades, and walked into the dining room like a man reporting for a shift. Weapon rising, translator already forming another warning, the lead soldier turned toward him. It never finished the sentence. Vito's pan connected with the side of its helmet in a wide arc, the impact ringing out like a church bell dropped down an elevator shaft. The creature staggered into a booth, its weapon discharging into the ceiling and bringing down a section of pressed tin paneling that had hung there since 1974. "You don't," Vito said, already swinging again, "touch the pies." A second soldier raised its weapon toward him. Before it could fire, the walk-in cooler door at the back of the kitchen slammed open, and Marchetti's entire evening prep crew, 4 line cooks who'd come in early to get a jump on dinner service, poured into the dining room armed with whatever had been in reach. A meat cleaver, a rolling pin. A 20-pound sack of flour swung like a medieval mace by a line cook named Freddie, which burst on impact and coated the second soldier's visor in a fine white cloud that sent it stumbling blind into an overturned table. One shot got off from the third soldier, and it took out most of the bar along with a framed photograph of Vito's father that had hung there since the restaurant opened. That, more than anything else that had happened so far, was what turned the fight from chaotic into genuinely furious. Angela, who'd worked the floor at Marchetti's for 11 years, came in from one side with a serving tray raised like a riot shield. A kid named Marco, who'd only started that summer, came in from the other. Between the two of them, and a busboy wielding a broken chair leg, the third soldier went down under a pile of humans in aprons within 20 seconds. Less than 3 minutes, start to finish. Marchetti's dining room looked like it had survived a small earthquake by the time it was over. 3 armored bodies tangled among the wreckage of the booths, and Vito Marchetti standing in the middle of it all, cast-iron pan in hand, chest heaving, staring down at the ruined slick of sauce and cheese on his kitchen floor with an expression of pure, undiluted grief. 31 years, he said quietly. Nobody's ever knocked a pie. Debris crunched under Dominic's shoes as he picked his way toward him, stepping carefully over an unconscious alien soldier's outstretched arm. "Chef, we should call somebody." "We are calling somebody." Vito set the pan down on the pass with a heavy clang and reached for the wall phone that miraculously still worked. He dialed a number from memory, waited 3 rings, and when it picked up said, in the exact tone he used to order produce, "Sal, it's Vito. Yeah, I know you saw the news. Listen, get Tony, get the guys from the Union Hall, and get down to Taylor Street. No, I'm serious. They knocked my pies on the floor. A pause followed. Then, audibly, even through the phone, Sal said something that hardened Vito's expression into something colder and more purposeful than grief. Yeah, Vito said, bring the bats. Fast and embellished, exactly the way word always traveled through that neighborhood, the news reached Taylor Street inside 20 minutes, filling the block with people who had no business being anywhere near an active alien landing zone, and every intention of being there anyway. First to arrive was Sal Bertoli, driving his catering van up onto the sidewalk because the street was blocked with debris, shouting for his nephew Tony to grab the equipment from the back before the engine had even stopped. Aluminum baseball bats made up most of the equipment. 2 chainsaws normally reserved for ice sculptures came next, followed by a case of empty wine bottles somebody suggested filling with something flammable. Carried reverently by a retired boxer named Frankie who ran the barbershop 2 doors down, was a set of brass knuckles that hadn't seen use, by his account, since 1987, and had apparently been waiting patiently for an occasion worthy of them. By the time the Osrath Combine dispatched a reinforced patrol to investigate the silence from their initial landing team, Taylor Street had transformed into something between a block party and a militia staging ground. Restaurant owners from 3 surrounding blocks showed up with whatever heavy kitchen equipment they could carry: rolling pins, meat tenderizers, an entire case of frozen mozzarella that a deli owner named Rosa insisted could be thrown, like a discus. I did track in high school. Off-duty streets and sanitation workers arrived with tire irons slung over their shoulders like rifles. Somebody's uncle rolled in an antique decorative cannon that turned out to be entirely non-functional, though he insisted on positioning it anyway, for morale. 12 soldiers strong, backed by 2 hovering support drones, the reinforced Osrath patrol descended onto Taylor Street, expecting to find a handful of dazed survivors among the wreckage of the initial contact. What they found instead was roughly 60 Chicagoans standing in loose formation across the block, armed with an assortment of kitchen implements and blunt objects, flanked by Vito Marchetti himself, who had changed out of his flour-dusted chef's whites into a clean apron for what he clearly considered a more formal occasion, cast-iron pan still in hand. Static crackled through the lead officer's translator. You will disperse. Further resistance will result in. You knocked his pies, someone in the crowd shouted, and that was apparently all the explanation anyone required. The entire block surged forward at once. Less a battle than a rout, what followed happened fast. The support drones managed exactly 2 shots before Frankie, moving with a speed that belied his 71 years, put a brass-knuckled fist through the housing of the nearest one and sent it crashing into a parked car. A running start carried Sal's nephew Tony toward the second drone with one of the ice sculpture chainsaws, and in a maneuver eyewitnesses would later describe as either insane or the single greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. He carved clean through the leg joint of an alien soldier, attempting to retreat toward the loading dock behind Marchetti's. Enough force to crack an alien's visor came out of Rose's thrown mozzarella ball, and she turned to the person beside her afterward and said, with enormous satisfaction, "Told you." Calm, methodical fury carried Vito through the chaos. The same energy he'd spent 3 decades running a kitchen through dinner rush now redirected at an alien invasion. He seemed to consider a comparatively minor logistical challenge. He caught the retreating patrol leader against the wall of his own restaurant, pan raised, and said, voice gone dangerously quiet, "You want to apologize to my dining room." Garbled, untranslated static was the only answer the alien managed, bleeding from a cracked helmet seal, before Vito's pan connected a final time, and the officer slid down the brick wall into an undignified heap beside an overturned garbage can. Badly delayed by both traffic and a citywide communications, blackout the Osrath Combine had triggered as part of their initial assault. Chicago police arrived to find Taylor Street looking like the aftermath of a parade gone catastrophically wrong. Electrical cord borrowed from a hardware store 2 blocks over held 11 alien soldiers zip-tied together in a row. One support drone sat mounted, trophy-style, on the hood of Sal's catering van. Several hundred people had gathered at the police barricades, filming on their phones, and the overwhelming sentiment among the assembled Chicagoans, when asked by a visibly shaken patrol officer what exactly had happened here, was some variation of the same sentence. They messed with the wrong pizza place. Word of the Taylor Street incident spread through the rest of the city faster than any official channel could keep up with, and by early evening, a strange and specific kind of confidence had settled over Chicago's restaurant districts. If a 42-seat deep dish joint could put 12 armed soldiers on the ground in under 3 minutes, the reasoning went, then maybe the whole invasion wasn't quite the unstoppable event the television anchors kept describing. Bridgeport heard about it first, passed along by a cousin of Sal's who worked the counter at a hot dog stand near the Sox Park. Pilsen heard next, through a group text that started with a grainy video and ended, 40 minutes later, with half a dozen taquerias organizing informal patrols along 18th Street. By nightfall, the pattern had repeated itself in a dozen neighborhoods, each one adapting the Taylor Street model to its own particular flavor of stubbornness. None of this was coordinated by any official body. No emergency broadcast told restaurant owners to arm their staff with rolling pins. No general issued the order to defend the neighborhood's food. It happened the way certain things in Chicago always happened, informally, loudly, and with an absolute conviction that nobody from outside the neighborhood had the right to walk in and start breaking things. Commander Vresk, watching the pattern spread across his tactical display from high orbit, initially dismissed it as an isolated incident. His fleet had encountered isolated pockets of resistance on other worlds before, small, disorganized, easily contained. Taylor Street, in his initial reading, was simply an unlucky patrol that had stumbled into an unusually aggressive civilian gathering. That reading did not survive contact with the second wave of reports. At 6:15 that evening, an Osrath supply convoy attempting to resupply the downtown occupation zone made the mistake of routing through Pilsen. 6 armored transports rolled down 18th Street expecting an easy corridor. What they found instead was a gauntlet of taquerias, each one emptying its kitchen staff into the street the moment the convoy's engines were audible. Cast-iron combals swung like clubs. A prep cook named Marisol put a boning knife through a soldier's forearm joint with the same economy of motion she used on a chicken breast. An elderly man who ran a palateria 3 doors down threw frozen popsicles with enough force to crack a visor, a detail that would later show up, verbatim, in the Combine's official incident report, listed under the heading Unidentified Projectile Frozen Dairy Product. 3 of the 6 transports never made it out of Pilsen. The other 3 limped back to the downtown perimeter trailing smoke, their crews reporting an engagement so chaotic that none of them could agree on how many hostiles they'd actually faced. Bridgeport delivered its own version of the same lesson an hour later, when a patrol sent to investigate reports of armed civilian gatherings near a sporting venue found itself surrounded by a crowd that had, over the course of the afternoon, worked itself into a state somewhere between tailgate and uprising. Grills meant for bratwurst became makeshift barricades. A man in a Sox jersey took an alien soldier's own weapon away from it and, unable to figure out how to fire it, simply beat the creature with the stock until it stopped moving. By 10 that night, Commander Vresk's tactical map of Chicago looked less like an occupation and more like a series of small, humiliating brush fires, each one started by an incident that, on its own, should have been strategically meaningless. A bakery, a hot dog stand, a neighborhood bar that had, according to the report, deployed darts as an improvised area denial weapon. None of it made sense according to any model the Combine's cultural analysts had built. Ossick, the tactical analyst who had spent the better part of a decade compiling threat assessments for the Combine's expansion into this sector, requested an emergency session with Commander Vresk shortly after midnight. He arrived with a data slate full of incident reports and an expression that suggested he had not yet found a satisfying explanation for any of them. "Walk me through it," Vresk said. "There is a pattern," Ossick said, "but it does not resemble any resistance structure we've documented on the other 41 worlds. It isn't military. It isn't political. It appears to be organized around." He hesitated, checking his notes as though the words might have rearranged themselves since the last time he'd read them. "Around food." "Explain." "Every significant engagement tonight originated at, or was triggered by proximity to, a location where humans prepare or sell meals. Restaurants, bakeries, a hot dog stand, a bar that serves food alongside alcohol. In every case, the initiating event was some form of property damage to the establishment or its inventory, followed by an immediate, disproportionate, and highly coordinated civilian response." Vresk studied the projected map, where dozens of small red markers pulsed across the city's neighborhoods, each one tagged with a location type that, translated into the Combine's tactical vocabulary, sounded almost comically mundane. Sandwich shop, ice cream parlor, bakery. "You're telling me," Vresk said slowly, "that our forces are being defeated by delicatessens." "I am telling you," Ossick said, "that this species has organized an entire civilization around the preparation and defense of meals, and that our doctrine failed to account for it because no prior world we've studied treats food with anything close to this level of," he searched for the word again, "reverence." Silence held the chamber for a long moment. "Recommendation," Vresk said finally. "Immediate reassessment. NT of the occupation model," Ossick said. "Every location matching a food service classification should be treated as a potential hardened resistance node, not a soft target. I would also recommend we obtain a first-hand account from a survivor of the original incident. Understanding the specific trigger might help us predict future flashpoints before they cost us more units." The officer who had led the original Taylor Street patrol had, in fact, survived, and it was his account, delivered 3 days later from a debrief chamber aboard the flagship, that finally gave the Combine's command staff a full picture of what had gone wrong. His name, rendered as closely as the Combine's translation systems could manage, was Coral. Standing in the debrief chamber, his armor replaced, his voice still carrying a faint tremor the ship's medical staff had been unable to fully diagnose, he delivered his report in short, careful sentences, as though speaking too quickly might set something off again. "Describe the hostile engagement," Vresk said. "They were defending a food establishment." "Clarify, what military value did this establishment hold?" Coral hesitated. "None, as far as we could determine, none." "Then why did the local population mobilize with such?" Vresk consulted the report again, as if the words might have changed since the last time he'd read them. "Such disproportionate violence." "We damaged their food," Coral said, "specifically their pizza." A long silence held the chamber. "Explain pizza," Vresk said finally. Adequate language for the task did not come easily to Coral. "It is a baked dish, bread, sauce, cheese, prepared in a specific manner unique to that region of the city. The preparation reportedly takes considerable time and skill. When our forces damaged several units of it during the initial engagement, the response was," he paused again, "immediate, overwhelming, coordinated." "Coordinated by whom? Military command?" "No, by the establishment's proprietor, a civilian. He telephoned associates and requested," Coral checked his own notes, as though he still didn't quite believe what he'd written, "he requested that they bring the bats." Vresk stared at him. "Bats?" "Blunt striking implements, Within 20 minutes, approximately 60 additional civilians had assembled, armed with kitchen equipment and improvised weapons. They were not a military unit. They were, by every metric we possess, ordinary tradespeople from the surrounding area. Coral's hands, resting at his sides, had begun to shake slightly. They fought with more coordination and ferocity than the standing militia we encountered on their Von 7. Leaning forward from his position near the chamber's edge, Ossik spoke for the first time. "You're saying an unarmed civilian population, with no formal training, defeated a reinforced Combine patrol because we damaged their food?" "I am saying," Coral replied, and here his composure finally broke entirely, "that food in this territory is not merely sustenance. It is identity. It is," he struggled for the word, "it is sacred to them in a manner our cultural analysis entirely failed to anticipate." The proprietor personally led the counterattack. He struck 3 of our soldiers unconscious with a cooking implement before the civilian militia arrived. He did this not out of strategic necessity. He did this because we had, in his words, knocked his pies. Around the chamber, the assembled officers exchanged glances ranging from skeptical to visibly unsettled. Vresk sat back slowly, letting the silence stretch. "What is your assessment," Vresk asked, "of the broader risk this presents to the occupation timeline?" Coral did not hesitate this time. "Sir, I would recommend in the strongest possible terms that we avoid any further engagement with food preparation establishments in this territory. Restaurants, markets, any location where meals are prepared and served. Our cultural models suggested these locations posed minimal strategic value and should be deprioritized in the occupation sequence. That assessment was catastrophically incorrect. These locations appear to function as rally points capable of mobilizing armed civilian resistance within minutes, led by individuals whose combat willingness exceeds anything documented in our prior 41 campaigns." Quiet settled over the chamber while Vresk studied the tactical map still projected above the central console, where dozens of small red markers blinked across a metropolitan region considerably larger than the single city block his initial reports had led him to expect. "Reclassify the region," he said finally. "Full withdrawal from the affected sector. Update the invasion doctrine to reflect." He paused, visibly searching for language that would survive scrutiny from higher command without sounding as absurd as it actually was. "To reflect that food service establishments in human population centers represent hardened, unpredictable resistance nodes. Recommend all future contact with this species avoid any structure identified by translated signage containing culinary terminology." Still frowning at the report, Ossik asked quietly, "And the specific establishment, the one where this began?" One final time, Vresk looked at the file at the name, translated awkwardly through the Combine's linguistic systems, that appeared at the top of the incident report. "Flag it," he said, "permanently. Under no circumstances does any Osrath vessel approach that structure again." Under a new classification, the file closed and archived that night, distributed in slightly different translated forms to every Combine vessel operating within range of Earth for the remainder of the occupation attempt. Avoid establishments preparing regional culinary specialties. Resistance probability extreme. See Chicago, Taylor Street incident. By dawn the following morning, Combine forces had begun a staged withdrawal from the greater Chicago metropolitan area, citing what internal communications described only as unacceptable resource attrition in soft target zones. Federal officials, still scrambling to understand the shape of the previous day's chaos, would spend the following weeks trying to reconstruct a coherent military narrative from a series of incidents that stubbornly refused to resemble anything in any counterinsurgency manual ever written. 6 days after the invasion had been driven entirely out of the city, a fact confirmed by both federal announcement and, more reliably, by the absence of any further ships over the loop, Marchetti's deep dish house reopened for dinner service. Temporary boards covered the front windows while the new glass was installed. Patchwork repairs held the bullet-scarred bar together. The framed photograph of Vito's father, miraculously, had survived the entire ordeal with only a cracked corner of glass, and Vito hung it back in its exact original spot before doing anything else to the dining room. Longer than any wait Marchetti's had ever seen, even during the height of tourist season, the line outside the restaurant that first night back stretched around the block. Half of Chicago, it seemed, wanted to eat at the restaurant where the pizza had, quite literally, started a war. An hour before opening, Dominic found Vito in the kitchen, standing over the ovens exactly as he always did, checking a fresh pie through the glass with the same critical squint he'd used for 31 years. "You sure you're ready for tonight?" Dominic asked. "Place is gonna be packed. Everybody wants to see the guy who fought the aliens." Vito straightened, wiped his hands on his apron, and glanced toward the dining room, where the new glass caught the evening light and where, above the bar, his father's photograph hung slightly crooked despite his best efforts to level it. "They don't want to see me," he said. "They want to see if the sausage is still good." "Is it?" One more time, Vito checked the oven, nodded once, satisfied, and reached for the towel hanging from his shoulder. "4 more minutes," he said, "then we'll know." Past the boarded storefront where the ice sculpture chainsaw had gone through an alien's leg joint, past the spot where Frankie's brass knuckles had ended a drone, past the wall where Sal had once parked his catering van up on the sidewalk with a trophy mounted on the hood, the line outside stretched further down Taylor Street than anyone could remember it going before. None of it had a plaque yet. Somebody was already talking about getting one made. Rosa's Deli, 4 blocks over, had reopened the same night, a hand-lettered sign taped to her door reading, "We're still here. Ask about the mozzarella." In Pilsen, Marisol went back behind the counter of her taqueria the following morning as though nothing unusual had happened at all, though she kept the boning knife within easier reach than she used to, just in case. Near the ballpark in Bridgeport, the bar that had deployed darts as an improvised area denial weapon put up a new sign of its own. "First round on US if you helped clean up." News crews descended on the neighborhood for a week straight, hunting for a tidy explanation that never quite arrived. Military analysts flown in from Washington interviewed Vito for the better part of an afternoon and left with a report that one staffer later admitted, off the record, did not translate well into a briefing format. A cable news anchor asked Vito, on air, whether he considered himself a hero. Vito considered the question for a long moment, the way he considered a pie that might need 1 more minute in the oven, and said that heroes didn't usually have grease burns on both forearms and a floor that still smelled faintly of scorched mozzarella. Somewhere far beyond the atmosphere, in a fleet already retreating toward the edge of the solar system, a tactical analyst filed a final addendum to the Combine's invasion doctrine. 1. Line added beneath the section marked Chicago, Taylor Street incident, extreme resistance probability. Additional note, do not, under any circumstances, ask what's in the sauce. Vito never did share the recipe. 31 years, and he wasn't about to start now. Not for reporters, not for the Department of Defense, and certainly not for anything that had come down out of the sky expecting an easy afternoon on Taylor Street.